im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati, osim onoga ko ima žig ili ime zvijeri ili broj imena njezina.
Pozdrav dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Današnja tema je 5G mreža. Naime, svi smo čuli da jedan od najvažnijih političkih prioriteta i Europske unije i Hrvatske je digitalizacija. Za to je nužno da se postavi mreža po cijeloj Hrvatskoj, prvenstveno 5G mreža. I danas razgovaramo o temi koja je naša sadašnjost i skora budućnost i moramo si postaviti pitanje da li znamo dovoljno o tome. Stoga sam odlučio vam dovesti gosta koji je već ispred nas, dolazi iz Sjedinjenih Država, iz New Yorka i već su se našli sa problemima i izazovima koje donosi digitalizacija, pa je važno da ta iskustva prenesemo i vama. Moja današnja gošća je gospođa Odette Wilkens. Hello Odette, welcome to our show in Croatia.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Can you tell us a few words about your background?
Yes, I'm a technology transactional attorney. So I've been working on transactional technology agreements for a number of years. It's been over 20 years that I've been doing that. I am also president and general counsel of Wired Broadband, which is a nonprofit organization located in New York City, focusing on the safe deployment of telecommunications. So there's a safe way of deploying it and an unsafe way of deploying it. So we want to focus on the safe way of deploying wireless communications. And then I'm also head of the New York City Alliance for Safe Technology. And then I'm also the chair and general counsel for the National Call for Safe Technology, which includes well over 100 community groups and individuals around the country who are also focused on the safe deployment of telecommunications.
I think you are the right person to explain us what will happen in the future in Croatia, because Croatia is heading to total digitalization, and for that purpose we need to put a network of telecommunication stations in our country, but also in Europe. Are you prepared for us today presentation what is safe technology and how to use this new technology on a safer way for our health, but not only for health?
Yes, and I've put together a presentation that shows you an example in New York City. And so I'd like to start with that presentation. Okay, thank you. Next slide. All right, that's my curriculum vitae, which I just reviewed. Next slide. All right, so in New York City, there are a number of community boards which are advisory to the mayor, which have opposed the 5G towers. And we have been proposed 5G 32-foot towers. And that's about three-story building. And so about 25% of New Yorkers are opposed to the 5G towers, and that includes various reasons. That's for health, adverse health outcomes, public safety, nuisance, privacy concerns, reduced property values, and they're also ugly and obtrusive. Next slide. This is what 5G towers look like in New York City. There is no setback requirement, so they can put it as close to a building as they'd like. As you see in the middle picture, how small the people are compared to these 5G towers. And then on the far right is a 5G tower with advertising. Next slide. These 5G towers have 5 bays of antennas. The bottom one is supposed to be for free Wi-Fi for people on the street. And then the next 4 bays are 2 for 4G and 2 for 5G. And if you place these very close to people's homes and businesses, that's a lot of radiation that you're exposing the population to. Next slide. We also have these backpacks, these boxes that they're putting on utility poles, and they're usually on light utility poles. So we already have 7,000 of these installed, and we have another 6,000 that are going to come on the way. So we don't understand why we need these 5G cell towers as well. Next slide, please. And this is also another installation, and that is a pole top on top of a light pole. This is outside of a third floor apartment and right outside a child's bedroom. That is not a safe place for an antenna to be. Next slide. These are antennas on top of a roof, and this I would call an antenna farm. Many antennas on top of the roof, and this is in the middle of Manhattan in New York City on 53rd Street and Lexington Avenue. Next slide. Well, New York City isn't New York City without graffiti, and these towers definitely invite graffiti. So as you see, this is in my neighborhood, and there's already graffiti on it. Next slide. And on both sides of this pole, there's more graffiti. So that is something that we can look forward to. So that's a bit of a nuisance. Next slide. All right, so the premise for these 5G towers, and in many parts of the United States, is to bridge the digital divide. In other words, to get people to have connection to the internet. And the information that's being put out to the public is that 5G is going to bridge the digital divide. Many people do not believe that that is the case, and we certainly don't believe that that is the case either. Because, first of all, who's going to be able to afford a 5G phone? And then when 5G becomes obsolete, who's going to be able to afford a 6G phone, 7G phone, and the services? As a technology attorney, I have negotiated with a number of technology companies, and the economic model for technology is to artificially retire their services or their products to compel consumers to buy new products and services. And wireless is no different. And there's planned obsolescence because in order to generate future revenue, they have to artificially retire the previous services. A friend of mine had a 3G phone, and she was very happy with the 3G phone. She was able to make phone calls, but then 3G became retired. So once that got retired, she had to buy a 4G phone, which did not work as well. And so just because there's an advancement doesn't mean that it's better. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. So we are looking at a proof of concept. 5G towers in New York City have gotten approval from the Public Design Commission, and that's to see whether there's an aesthetic impact on the streets of New York City. And they've approved a pilot program of 200 of these 5G towers. But so far, there's been opposition from those 16 community boards, and now we also have 17 now. And so it's well over 25% of New Yorkers who have either disapproved or asked for a moratorium until their questions are answered. There's also opposition from many government representatives on the local, state, and as well as the federal level. And also there's opposition from all the historic preservation organizations in New York City because of the impact on historical structures and historic districts in New York City. And we have many of them. Next slide. So when we talk about digital equity, the three things that we're looking at is one, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, which is the top accounting department of the United States, states that 5G is likely to exacerbate the digital divide. And the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which represents the interests of equity groups, says that who's going to be able to afford a 5G phone? And then we also have, as a second level, on the local level, we have community leaders who are saying that 5G is creating the digital divide. And then the third issue is that cell towers do devalue the property values near them because people don't want to buy property near cell towers. And so that leads to up to a 20% reduction in property values. Next slide. So when we talk about bridging the digital divide, we're not talking necessarily about people on the street. While the 5G towers, for instance, in New York City and perhaps towers in Croatia as well, are bridging the digital divide for people on the street, it's not doing anything in New York City for helping to bridge the digital divide at home for people who cannot afford the internet. And wired connections are the answer. So fiber, coaxial cable, your copper landlines, your phone lines are the answer. And in the United States, fiber is a national priority. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration has affirmed that fiber to the premises is the best solution. It is future-proof, and we should only use wireless as a last resort. Now, that was testimony given by the former Federal Communications Commission chair, Tom Wheeler. And it is known that fiber's benefits for in-home use is fantastic. It's unmatched in speed, reliability, capacity, and cybersecurity. So if you're concerned about your personal data being protected, wired is the way to go because wireless is not very secure. And 5G is the least secure of any of its predecessors. And the lifespan of fiber goes about 25, 50 years and may even go much longer. So if it's once and done for a long time. Wireless has a very short lifespan, and we've heard that it's closer to 5 years. So that's not very sustainable. Next slide. And if you have your landlines, definitely keep them, because if there is ever an emergency, you're going to want to have those landlines accessible to you, because the cell phones in an emergency, the cell lines are going to become congested, and there's not going to be any way to make an emergency call. And also, if there's fire and the cell tower goes on fire, then you're not going to be able to make a phone call. And we had this issue on the East Coast during an earthquake when many could not use their cell phones, but landlines worked just fine. So your landlines are very important for emergencies. Cell phones are not that great for emergencies. If there's a cell phone outage, if the cell tower catches on fire, or if there's so many people trying to call emergency services that the lines get jammed. And actually, the cellular system went down in California in 2024, earlier this year, and it left at least 70,000 people stranded without the ability to make an emergency call. And I've heard that the number is actually closer to several million. Next slide. So is anyone regulating the safety of 5G? So that is the big question, right? That's a question that you started asking me. Basically, is 5G safe? In the United States, there's nobody regulating the safety of electromagnetic radiation. We call it electromagnetic frequency or radio frequency radiation. Not any of the federal agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Communications Commission, or the Center for Disease Control, since the mid-1990s. And who's going to be monitoring the level of emissions? Well, the Federal Communications website states that they don't have enough personnel to monitor compliance. So basically, we're kind of flying blind here. And the Environmental Protection Agency was involved in research studying the safety of radiation in the 1990s. After the research concluded that the radiation was dangerous, producing biological effects and potentially harmful for health, the EPA was defunded. So that's a problem. No one's minding the store. And I'm not sure that it's being done in Croatia or any other parts of Europe either. Next slide. So when we look at the question of whether 5G is safe, we can look at how the telecom industry characterizes wireless radiation. They characterize it as a pollutant in their cell phone device protection plans. And that also disclaims any liability for personal injury. And the telecoms, however, have issued warnings to their shareholders of potential health claims, which would affect their financial stability because of substantial claims and settlements that they may have to pay out. Next slide. And even insurance companies rank 5G and electromagnetic radiation as a high-risk category, comparing the issue to lead, and most insurance companies have electromagnetic field exclusions. So you are not going to even be able to get insurance for personal injury from electromagnetic radiation. And actually, the Swiss Re Institute, it's a world-leading provider of insurance, classifies 5G mobile networks as a high off-the-leash risk because of potential claims for personal injury, as any negative health effects would come with a long latency. So that means it may take 10 years for cancer to show up, or it may take 5 years for another immune disease to show up. And so there may be a long latency. So they don't want to accept that risk. Next slide. There's also the public safety hazard. So while towers are being built and these antennas are being placed on the roofs of building, there can be collapse from structural failure. And then there's no fall zone for public safety. So there should be a zone of safety many feet away from where the public would be, but there is none. So this is also a fire hazard because, especially for 5G, because the industry knows that 5G runs very hot. It does a lot of analog to digital conversions, and therefore it is prone to running very hot. Now, wireless towers are already electrical installations. And do we know whether they comply even with the electrical and building codes? We don't know whether they comply with them in the United States, and I don't know about Europe. But if a cell tower catches on fire, and cell towers here in the United States have caught on fire and they've done a lot of damage, it takes up to 60 minutes to cut the power so that the firefighters don't get electrocuted. When the firefighters come, they cannot automatically put out the fire on a cell tower. They have to wait for the electrical company to turn off the power completely. Now, what happens is that when a cell tower catches on fire, people need time to escape. So it should not be close to homes, schools, or businesses. And there have been many fires, especially in California. The worst fire was a fire in 2018, and that was the Woolsey fire. And it caused $6 billion worth of damages. 100,000 acres were destroyed. 295,000 people had to be evacuated, and there were 3 deaths. The temperatures at these cell towers can reach a very high level. So they can reach up to 35,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 3 times the estimated temperature of the sun. And that happened in Chula Vista in 2021 when a 100-foot tower became molten plasma. Next slide. So now we get to the part of, is wireless radiation safe? Again, the depth of absorption really depends on how old you are. So if you are a child, a 5-year-old child, the wireless radiation will be absorbed by most of the brain. If you're a 10-year-old child, a little bit less so, and if you're an adult, less so. This is the view on the top of the head with a cell phone on the left side of the head. Next slide. This is a chart showing the symptoms that people have been getting when they are very close to a tower compared to when they are farther away from a tower. When they are very close to a tower, less than 10 meters, there, as you can see on the red bar chart, there is significant instances of fatigue, headaches, difficulty in concentration, as well as cardiovascular issues, heart problems, heart disruption, hearing disruptions, nausea, and many other issues. And as you can see, the bar chart gets less and less the farther away you get from a cell tower. When you are more than 300 meters away from a cell tower, there are still symptoms, but they are far less than those who are close to a cell tower. Next slide. All right, so now we get to more of the science on is 5G safe? So first of all, back in 1993, there was a TV broadcast in the United States. It was a famous broadcast station, and it was Larry King Live, and he was interviewing a man whose wife had died of brain cancer, and when the tests were done, the medical tests were done, the tumor was where she held her cell phone. And the next day, the telecommunication stocks declined. So what happened is that the telecom industry was trying to do damage control, and they funded probably the largest study in the world and it was overseen by Harvard School of Public Health, the Food and Drug Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, and many other agencies. And what they found were biological effects, and that they were potentially hazardous to human health. And this is back around 1995. When they found biological effects, what that means is that you don't necessarily have to feel the injury, but it is interacting with the cells in your body. And because this is cumulative, it may take a while for the injury to take place. And once the injury takes place, that may be too late. It may be reversible. Sometimes it is not reversible. And other times it's much more serious. In 2000, a major telecom carrier in Europe, and also that has a major branch in the United States, commissioned a study that found links to cancer, leukemia, neurological disorders, and cognitive impairment, and particularly with a special caution for children. That was leaked out. That was not made public. It was leaked out by a whistleblower, and we have a copy of that report. Next slide. So after that, in 2004, Swisscom applied for a patent. Swisscom is a major telecommunications company in Switzerland, and they applied for a patent to reduce the amount of electromagnetic radiation because of the high risk of cancer. That was very significant because this is a patent application, and they're already acknowledging that there are health issues, no question about it, in this patent application. And they said it was high risk of cancer. The World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified wireless radiation, and at that time it was 2G and 3G, as a possible human carcinogen, a class 2B possible human carcinogen in 2011. Some of those scientists are now calling the wireless radiation a human carcinogen. The National Toxicology Program, which is one of the most prestigious, if not the most prestigious toxicology program in the world, found clear evidence of cancer in 2011. And the Ramazzini Institute in Italy confirmed the same results in 2018. And unfortunately, our Food and Drug Administration ignored that and said that there's nothing to see here when there's clear evidence of cancer. Next slide. All right, so the Federal Communications Commission was sued by environmental groups, and they were ruled against they lost in court. The DC Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States, just under the US Supreme Court, stated that the FCC ignored 11,000 pages of scientific peer-reviewed studies showing biological effects below the FCC's wireless limits. And in 2019, the FCC ignored all of those studies, and the judges said no. The FCC did not act appropriately, and so they must go back and re-examine their emission limits. So the FCC was found to have been arbitrary and capricious in its determination. Now, this has become a shield for industry, because so long as the FCC does not update its limits, as long as the carriers are operating within the FCC limits, there can be no legal remedy, no legal claims for personal injury from the wireless radiation. So it is extremely important. The FCC, that was back in 2021 when the court determined that the FCC acted inappropriately. And so since 2021, they have not updated their limits, and it's now over 3 years later. In 2019, there was a hearing of the telecom industry in Congress, and U.S. Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut asked them, is there any independent study being done on 5G? And the telecom executive said, none that we know of. So he said, we're flying blind here as far as health and safety is concerned. And that's exactly what's happening. And I believe that's also happening around the world as well. Then there was a state, New Hampshire, in the United States, formed a commission in order to study the effects of 5G, and they found harm to people and the environment below the FCC limits. And that was in 2020. Next slide. The European Parliament in 2021 received a report that they asked to be done on the health impacts of 5G. And it concluded that the commonly used radio frequency radiation frequencies of 450 to 6,000 megahertz are probably carcinogenic for humans, and they also affect male fertility. And there are possible adverse effects on the development of embryos, fetuses, and the newborn. In Sweden, there have been studies done, case studies on 5G towers and rooftop antennas, 5G rooftop antennas. And since January of 2023, there have been 8 case studies, every single one of them showing microwave syndrome of these people. And they have suffered from headaches, tinnitus, abnormal fatigue, heart arrhythmia, burning skin, trouble concentrating, and other ailments. Next slide. Now, so we heard about the 8 case studies. Those are relating to individuals. Well, we have more. And in California, there was an elementary school, and back in 2009, there was a cell tower placed there. That was in 5G. So I believe that may have just been 3G or even 4G. And there were 4 children from ages 6 to 11 years old who got cancer, liver, kidney, and brain. And 5 teachers got breast cancer. Unfortunately, one of the children who got brain cancer, that's a glioblastoma, died just a couple of months ago in August. And the tower has been removed, was removed in 2019, and there's been no new incidences of cancer after the cell tower was removed. Next slide. And in Massachusetts, there were 17 residents who fell ill after a 4G tower was placed right near their homes. The children were vomiting in their beds, many had to evacuate their homes because it became a toxic zone. In Idaho, where 5G was installed, many got atrial fibrillation. And that is not a good situation. And apparently there was a cluster. So we're looking at clusters of people now in various areas where these towers are installed. And in Minnesota, there was a woman who got 51 strokes after 5G was installed. So that gives you an idea of what these individual stories are like and what people have been personally experiencing. So it's not just studies that have been done, through various programs. These are real people who are suffering. And so we need to provide some accommodation. We need to make sure the 5G is safe. And so far, there's a safe way of deploying wireless radiation, and there's an unsafe way of deploying it. And we are doing it the unsafe way. Next slide. And there you have further resources that you can check out. And then we have resources on the next slide as well. And that's the National Call for Safe Technology. And we have many resources there. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That very important thing. I want to mention here that nobody is against technology. Everybody wants to use it, but it's very important to use it on a safe way. I'm not sure if it's implemented that way, and that's why I would like to show some pictures from Croatia. And please, can you comment? Is it a safe way to implement, or it's not, and what we can do about it?
Yes, well, that's a lot of radiation right on top of, it looks like a residence. And we have found that people who live right underneath these types of towers get very sick, and they need to move out. So that's really not a safe way. It's not a safe deployment, and that also is not safe because it's not safe for not just the people right underneath. And I see that there's a balcony underneath. So they're really being exposed all the time, and the people around them as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually, you don't need 5G. 5G is meant for machine-to-machine communications. And 5G is not something that facilitates cell phone service. 4G is more than enough. You get cell phone service, you get streaming videos, you get everything. And that you can place, that has a reach of at least 9 miles. So you can put a 4G tower out in the middle of nowhere. It's not affecting anyone, it's not going to hurt anyone, and you can still you can reap the benefits without the adverse health outcomes. So if you have 4G, you can make all the calls that you want, you can do the streaming videos. 4G is plenty. You don't need 5G. 5G is really just another way for telecommunications companies to make money, because if people want, the next new technology, and they think they're getting something better. But here, advancement into the higher Gs does not necessarily mean you're getting a better product, and you're also putting your health at risk. So this is right next to somebody's window.
Yes.
This is really not good, and especially since it's line of sight, they're going to get blasted.
Okay. We'll see. This is picture from one building, but we will see this building later, and you can comment. Look, this is on a skyscraper.
Yes, that is not advisable. That is not advisable. That's really just to make money for the telecommunications industry. Again, you can put those 4G towers far away, and you can have all of the cellular service that you want. 5G is not necessary. 5G is a totally different technology. 5G is a beam-forming technology, whereas 4G and 3G are they are omnidirectional. And so imagine if you have a 5G phone, you're calling up the 5G signal. It's going to send a beam to your phone. So it looks looks for your phone and then it sends out a beam. That's going to be very powerful. I'm not sure what the frequencies are that are allowed in Europe or in Croatia, but it is very powerful, and you don't need it. 4G is plenty. You don't need 5G.
Look,
It's really just a way to make more money.
This is just close to some window. Somebody's living below this tower.
Well, we've experienced that people who have been living below them have gotten headaches, nauseous, vomiting every day, and heart arrhythmias. They have balance disorders, orientation disorders. That's not good.
And
they haven't been tested for safety.
We still don't know what are the long terms effectiveness of this radiation.
Well, we do know the long-term effects of wireless radiation, and at this point, a number of scientists are calling it a human carcinogen. So 5G has not yet been studied, but it looks like nobody wants to study them, because when they do, they'll find out that it's too dangerous. And as a matter of fact, I have read that the military is using 5G as a military weapon in order to target individuals in a crowd, to disperse crowds. And it's meant for crowd control, because what they're doing is they're focusing a beam on a person, and it makes them feel like their skin is burning, and that disperses the crowd. So why are we putting a military technology out into the public? I have no idea. But that's what I've read. Mm-hmm. Now, this seems to be far away.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it looks like it may be near a highway. So if you're near a highway and you are passing by, you can get negatively affected by this radiation. And because the radiation is, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it necessarily, you think that there's nothing wrong. But the problem is that it's cumulative. If you're exposed to it on a consistent basis, you will start to develop symptoms. And sometimes they're reversible and sometimes they're not. They're only reversible if you get away from the source. But if 5G is going to be put all over the place, then you're not going to be able to get away from it. And so, unfortunately, they're based on the science that I've read, there's going to be a real health crisis. Yes, and so here we have more antennas of different types. And they have repeaters as well. And I can see that it's right above where people are living, because right underneath there's a balcony, and it looks like people go out into the balcony. You do not want to be anywhere near these towers.
And this is building, when you saw this picture, when you said that it's very close to one window, and this is the roof of this building. Can you comment on this?
Well, yes, when you have rooftop antennas, you also get the radiation. And unfortunately, if you are right underneath it, you're going to really get a very large dose of radiation. And I was dealing with an elderly woman who was in her 80s, and she had a very nice apartment on the top floor of her building, and they put antennas right on top of her apartment. And she was very, very sick, was able to taste metal in her mouth. Her heart was having problems. She was vomiting every day. She was nauseous. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor wrote a note saying that she has been injured by this radiation. And unfortunately, people living underneath it are going to be injured, and people are not necessarily going to know why. They're not going to feel too good, and they may come down with cancer, and they might say, "Oh, I don't know why, But if they're living right underneath the cell tower, that may be a cause. So people are not going to know, they're not going to be able to correlate their illnesses with the cell towers and the rooftop antennas because the media isn't covering this. There seems to be a blackout in the media about all of the health issues that are related to these towers. And, and based on all of the studies that I just reviewed, there is no doubt that this is a problem. And yet they are putting it out for profit. And companies should not be making a profit based on not having, not complying with, not reviewing the science and not complying with safety standards.
Can you explain, please, how they're making better profit with these cell towers instead of, as we saw, this wire technology, exactly this, as you mentioned before, optic cables?
Fiber optics is really a much better. Fiber optics is much better. It has greater capacity. It's more cyber secure. You can easily intercept wireless signals.
Please explain. Please explain this part of safety. You mentioned already that there is a safety issue if we're going to have all these towers and lots of them, because there are possibility that hackers can come in and take your information, data.
Well, yes. 5G is known to be insecure. And Tom Wheeler, who was the former Federal Communications Commissioner, said that he actually, after he left the FCC, co-wrote an article, and he calls this the 5G cyber paradox. Because the more efficient the architecture is for 5G in order to get the data faster and to deliver it faster, the more insecure 5G is. So it's inherent in its architecture. And it's much less secure than 3G or 4G. There was in terms of, it's part of the Internet of Things, right? So let me tell you a story that happened in Nevada. There was a casino and they had a fish tank. The fish tank had a thermostat, which regulates the temperature of the tank. And there were hackers that were able to get into the casino's database through that thermostat, because the thermostat was connected through IoT, Internet of Things. They went through the thermostat, got access to their database, and they were able to extract from the database some very valuable information, and they put it up on the internet.
Please explain us what is Internet of Things.
So Internet of Things is where you have different devices talking to each other, so that if you, let's say, have your cell phone and you want to turn up the thermostat in your house, and you're not in your house, but you're on the road and you want to turn up the thermostat, so you do that. Or you turn on, the stove with your cell phone or your device, or you have different devices that interact, your modem, your router, all sorts of things. So they talk to each other, right? So you have it's machine-to-machine communications. And when you have that, especially if it's wireless, there are many, many surfaces on where a hacker can come in and hack the information, because it's wireless signals. And because 5G needs to have so many antennas around and so many nodes, you gain access to one node, you gain access to the whole thing, because 5G is not a hardware-based system, it is a software-based system. So you gain access to one node, you gain access pretty much to the entire network. 3G and 4G are hardware-based systems. So if there's a security breach, You can quarantine the breach. It's easier to quarantine the breach. With a 5G, I don't know how you quarantine the breach with a 5G, a breach in data with 5G. And that's what happened to the Nevada casino. They had a big breach because of, as a result of their IoT connection.
But why telecommunication companies don't invest in this safer way? Why they are using this 5G if there are so many potential dangers in the future?
Well, they're not responsible for the potential dangers. It's a great business model. You get all the benefits, but you don't get the liability. Mm-hmm. You don't get the liability for health hazards. You don't get the liability for security breaches, because if there's a security breach, it's the company that bought the 5G service, right? And so they're, or the company that's responsible for that. But it's usually not. A telecom carrier can get involved, I guess, but there's plausible deniability, and they can say, well, maybe the breach was due to something else, or whatever it is. It's a great business model. They can make a lot of profits without the liability. So I don't know to what extent the carriers have liability in the event of a data breach, because it depends on where the source of that data breach is. So it's sometimes difficult, and you have to do forensics to figure that out.
That reminds me on something not from the past, but not very far past. Well, but we'll not discuss this today. Just one more question concerning future. Already I heard that in some states there is implementing 6G, even 7Gs. Can you explain us what is 6G, and is there any new investment in that part in the United States?
Well, there is talk about 6G, and actually there's even talk about 10G. And from my understanding, as a 5G is machine-to-machine communications, 6G is AI. And in order to have AI, you need to have 5G. And that's the connection there. That's my understanding. That's how it was explained to me by a radio frequency engineer.
That means...
So 6G is starting to get rolled out, but then again, that's more in connection with AI.
That means without 5G, there is no 6G and there is no AI.
That's my understanding.
That's very interesting thing. Well, Odette, for last, just explain us, there is a safe way to implement all this technology. Can you explain us just in short sentence what we should do as ordinary citizens to protect our health and to protect our security?
Well, it would be concentrating on 4G deployment, which is miles and miles away. So you can put a 4G tower miles away, and it will reach not at least 9 miles, if not longer, a longer distance. That is a safe way of deploying technology. Putting it right up next to people's homes, outside of people's windows, on top of where they're living, is not safe. From what we've already seen through the studies and through people, from people that I have heard from personally as well. So we don't really need 5G. 5G is just machine-to-machine communications, and we really don't need it. 4G is plenty good for communications, streaming, videos, and other things. We don't really need 5G. And I prefer not to have anything that might be a military weapon outside of my window. So I don't think that that's an appropriate use of 5G.
Yeah, and we didn't mention, but it's very important that this technology needs lots of energy, electrical energy.
Oh, yes. 5G it requires at least 3 to 4 times the energy that's used for 4G deployment. So if we're looking at climate change and we're looking at making sure that there's no air pollution and there's no excess consumption of energy, 5G is known as an energy hog. And that's from an industry article. It's known as an energy hog. The batteries run very quickly on the 5G phone. So there's advice that's been given to turn off your 5G if you can, because it's going to use up the battery in your cell phone. And also, I have read reports that 5G will consume up to 61 times more energy by 2030. So it is not an energy saver. Wireless radiation is not green. Wired connections are green. Fiber is green. Coaxial cable is green. Copper lines are green. Wireless is not green because 5G is going to take a huge amount of energy consumption in order to operate. Just think of it, just logically. You need thousands and thousands and thousands of 5G nodes. And they're all connected to fiber and they're all connected to electricity. So if you just do a quick math, that's going to consume a tremendous amount of electricity. So that's not going to be very good for our climate change goals.
Thank you, Odette. Continue with your work, and I hope we will be in contact because we'll need your expertise for Croatia also.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm happy to come back whenever you'd like.
Thank you. Evo, dragi narode, čuli ste nekoga ko se razumije u to i koji zastupa sigurnost drugih građana, evo konkretno u New Yorku, oni su ispred nas i sve što se događalo njima, događa se i nama. Nemojmo zaboraviti da je opet naš premijer jasno rekao da su glavni ciljevi digitalizacija i klimatske promjene. Dakle, klimatske promjene, o tome smo razgovarali, vidjeli ste neke od mojih emisija, tako da neću ovdje širiti temu, međutim ta digitalizacija je usko povezana jer kao što vidite zahtijeva veliku potrošnju električne energije, a zelena tranzicija zahtijeva promjenu izvora energije, dakle sa takozvanih fosilnih goriva na čistu energiju kao što je bila u ovom slučaju električna, da li iz izvora nuklearne energije ili nešto treće. Međutim, to jedno s drugim ne ide, jer ako ćemo zahtijevati veću energiju, a manju proizvodnju imamo, to jednostavno ne možemo ispuniti. Tako da nema logike samo u toj politici, ali ono što je važno, svugdje se naglašava da će u Hrvatskoj biti na svakom otoku implementirana 5G mreža. U planu koji je sam Mario Draghi napisao za spas Europe, zove se Future of European Competitiveness, unutra stoji ubrzano implementiranje 5G tehnologije kako bi se postigla potpuna digitalizacija. Dakle, ubrzano. Što znači ubrzano? Već smo vidjeli što znači ubrzano u prethodnim krizama. To znači da regulatorne agencije gledaju kroz prste kompanijama i dozvoljavaju ono što nije u potpunosti sigurno i ono što na kraju mi, obični ljudi, platimo, da li zdravljem, novcem ili nečim trećim. Prema tome, pred nama je i nalazimo se u situaciji u kojoj implementiraju tu tehnologiju, a nisam siguran koliko su ispunili sve zahtjeve, pogotovo kad slušam druga iskustva koja kažu da određene stvari, kao evo konkretno 5G, uopće nije nužan za ono što nama treba, za poslovanje, za život, za svakodnevnu komunikaciju. Da 4G pruža svu uslugu koju trebamo i više od toga, a da je pri tome puno sigurniji. Tako da si postavljamo pitanje, a zašto forsiramo tehnologiju za koju evo znamo da možda nije potpuno sigurna za zdravlje, koja je skupa, zahtijeva puno energije, a pritom nam nije nužna. Da li možda zbog nekih drugih razloga? Ja mislim da da. Ja upravo mislim da se ta tehnologija implementira sa potpuno drugim razlozima, a da sve ostalo što nam pričaju je u stvari samo lijepo zapakirana laž, kao i obično do sada. Ja sam inače obradio ovu temu i više puta, možete pogledati emisije sa gostima koji je bio gospodin Peter van der Broek iz Belgije, zatim gospođa Mona Nilsson iz Švedske i gospodin Christian Oš iz Švicarske. Svo troje su mi objašnjavali, govorili što se događa u Europi. Govorili su i objašnjavali zbog čega ta tehnologija je neisplativa za velike komunikacijske sustave ako nije 5G i ako nema novih softvera koji će se kupovati. A isto tako kako ta agencija ICNIRP, Europska agencija koja je tu da osigura poštivanje zakona za telekomunikacijske kompanije i da regulira visinu zračenja koja bi bila prihvatljiva za ljudsko zdravlje, kako i u sukobu interesa njihovi članovi su dozvolili neke stvari koje apsolutno nisu u korist građana. Stoga vas toplo preporučam da pogledate te emisije i da krenete vi sa svojih mjesta, jer ove antene se nalaze iznad vaših kuća, u blizini vaših prozora, vaše djece koja su u školama, u vrtićima. Nalaze se na mjestima koje nisu prihvatljiva za vaše zdravlje, a kao što vidite, telekomunikacijske kompanije nemaju nikakvu obavezu prema vama i ako vam se nešto dogodi, oni neće plaćati kaznu. Kao što sam rekao, meni to se čini poznatom jer smo imali iskustvo u proteklom razdoblju da je netko implementirao preko 5 milijardi doza, odnosno 5 milijardi ljudi su dobili preko 13 milijardi doza nečega za koje niko ne odgovara za posljedice. Tako i ovdje niko neće odgovarati za posljedice, pa naravno da riskiraju jer je profit na prvom mjestu. Dakle, tim agencijama njih zanima njihov interes, ne zanimamo ih mi. Stoga je na nama da se sami izborimo za svoja prava. Evo, ja ću dalje pratiti ove teme koje su, kao što vidite, nepoželjne za mainstream, zato što se na njima ne može zaraditi, odnosno oni koji zarađuju ne dozvoljavaju da se o tome priča, jer to ugrožava njihov profit. Međutim, ja nisam tu da zarađujem na tome, nego sam na tu da upozoravam i da pokušavam osigurati sebi, svojoj djeci, vama, vašoj djeci, sigurnije i zdravije okruženje unatoč svim pritiscima i unatoč interesima velikih korporacija. Hvala lijepa na pažnji i uskoro se vidimo u sljedećoj epizodi Slobodni.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svojevoljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijeri, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludi. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.
Gdje su svi oni koji su nas vjerili?